Welcome to StartupHakk. My name is Spencer Thomason. I am CEO and co-founder of CleanRouter, as well as many other products. Here are some lessons that I've learned building a successful business while challenging startup norms. My challenge is to push you to rethink startup success. I'm going to be dual recording this. I'm going to shoot it in video, but also going to try to explain it in a way that I can use the audio as a podcast too. So if you're watching this on YouTube, please make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. If you're listening on a podcast, then make sure you go to subscribe and leave a good review. And you can go and check out YouTube to see pictures and other diagrams as well as other videos if you're listening to this on the podcast. So welcome to StartupHakk. This is episode 1, how an idea and a passion turned into a $5 million company. I've been a software developer for over 22 years. I'm married and I have a beautiful wife, Carson, as well as 5 awesome kids. I started this channel to tell us stories about how we started a successful startup company knowing nothing about starting a company. Clean Technology is the parent company of CleanRouter, as well as many other technologies and products. This podcast is going to focus on the launch of CleanRouter. It's going to be about how we took this idea and a passion and built it into something great. So, there I was. The year was 2009. All of the first series of this channel are going to be about our first year and what it takes to get an idea to a company and to get that company off the ground. The year was 2009. All of the first of this series of this channel are going to be about our first year and what it takes to get an idea to be a company and then to get that company off the ground. So Eric Vance was a good friend and a coworker from a previous company. So one day I get an IM from Eric on Google Chat. Hey, there's a guy who wants to start a filtered internet service provider, an ISP like Cox or CenturyLink or Comcast. I told him that I knew the perfect guy that we'd want to bring in. So what do you think? He asked me. Now, Eric and I had both had kids, and as parents, we were worried about what our kids were doing online. But mind you, this was 2009. Social media hadn't taken off. The smartest phone at the time was a BlackBerry. My response: a filtered ISP will cost you millions of dollars to get off the ground. At best, will serve just one neighborhood. The better way to solve this solution would be to build it into the modem. And so there we had it. The idea was born. Now, as you may know, you have this big, scary internet out there with the cloud, and if you're a parent, it comes into your home and hits at the modem. Connected to the modem is a router, usually responsible for broadcasting the wireless signal. But wireless was still really new at the time. After some discussion, I reasoned that modems in 2009 were difficult and tricky. The router is where we needed to live. A content filtering router for parents to manage what their kids could see online. My idea was to build that filtering into the router so that it would filter everything in the house. So the idea was born. And a little more about us. So Eric Vance and I had worked together for many years. I was introduced to Eric 5 years earlier in 2004. He was the development manager at a group at University of Phoenix. A mutual friend in the development group let me know there was an open spot, and so I applied. So I met Eric and he hired me into his group. I worked at University of Phoenix for a year, and then Eric left and gone to JDA. He recruited me to JDA in 2006. We both worked on the same team as peer developers at JDA until we got laid off together at the end of 2007. We then worked different jobs, and Eric started at a virtual company. That was a new concept back in those times, called ChorusWorks, that made SharePoint widgets. I followed Eric to ChorusWorks. We built a great platform on the same team. Then the market crashed at the end of 2008, and ChorusWorks was bleeding. They waited until 1 month before shipping our new platform, and then they laid 3 of the 5 developers off in February of 2009. So Eric and I were two of those 3 developers that got laid off. Eric had just moved to a small town in southern Utah since we were both working remote. I'd picked up a quick contract job here in Phoenix, Arizona, suburb. Eric was looking for a contract gig to be able to keep his family where they had just moved, but times were hard. This was when he had stumbled onto the guys who were looking to start a filtered internet service provider. And this is when the conversation happened. So now, back to this conversation that Eric and I had had. The idea was born. This was the first of a million steps that had brought us now today to a $5 million company. So what does success look like? The path has been anything but traditional, and I'm going to tell you stories and explain lessons that I've learned as we've gone through this path. So too many people think that success looks like this, a straight line. I have learned that couldn't be further from the truth. One of my favorite quotes from Steve Jobs is, "If you really look closely, most overnight successes took a really long time." So, and if you look at this, it took Steve Jobs over 2 decades to become an overnight billionaire with Apple. Microsoft founder Bill Gates founded the company in 1975, but it was 11 years before Microsoft went public and then made him an overnight success worth $350 million. It took Phil Knight over 10 years to grow Nike to be $3 million of gross revenue selling shoes, and then over 20 years before the company was even profitable, and almost 30 years to be a truly successful company. And now we all know what Nike is today. The point of this is that it's going to take some hacking to take a problem and find a solution. It takes a lot of hacks, as I call them, to take an idea and turn it into a company. And that's what I'm going to tell you about. That's what I would like to teach you, is how you take these hacks and turn them into a great idea. So back to our conversation again. Eric's and my conversation happened in March of 2009, and an idea was born. Eric started working with another guy who was with him locally to start talking around various different number of ideas and directions for the business to go in these various different directions to tackle filtering. To him, building the router was just one of many ideas, and he was being pressured by some of these others to move in directions other than the router. We'll talk a little more about this in episode 2. Me, I knew it was in the router. In order to get this to work, we needed to build the first residential content filtering router. There was corporate level servers that could do this, things like Barracuda and SonicWall and Bluecoat and other large big server products existed at the time, but no one had brought this into the home. That means we had to build a reverse proxy router. Now, what the heck is a reverse proxy router? A reverse proxy router means that all the traffic needed to filter through to the router and then would filter through, it would then push all of the traffic into the filter and then out to the internet and then back again. And this is what we built, what we were working to build. So now this was 2009. Wireless routers were still a very new technology. I think I'd bought my first router just 2 or 3 years before this. Most routers were 802.11b, which means that you would get 11 megabits per second at max from the router. 802.11.g or 802.11g was a brand new protocol with a whopping 54 megabits per second. And that was if you really had all the right hardware. And a lot of homes still didn't even have wireless. A recent Linksys router had been shipped with Linux on it. Linksys had gotten sued by the open source community and they were forced to release the source kernel for the router. An open source group grabbed this and started the community called OpenWRT. Now, where'd they get that weird OpenWRT name from? It was named after a model of the router that Linksys built with this firmware, the WRT54G. So initially I had my first problem I had to overcome. So hack number 1. I was a Windows developer. I'd loaded Linux a few times into a few different distros on a couple of different servers, but I'd always ended up scrapping the project and it had been limited success. But my 10 years of development experience at this point was all on Windows, and Linux was nowhere near as polished or as easy as it is today. The popular kernels of the day were 2.4 and 2.6 was just coming out. So this reminds me of another quote from Steve Jobs. I'm convinced that about half of what separates successful entrepreneurs from non-successful ones is pure perseverance. So I started hacking. I bought 3 of these routers on my own dime, and I started installing firmwares onto them. This required not just hours, but days of digging through forums, piecing parts together. There was no YouTube. Google was rough. There wasn't any Udemy or other online courses. I was slogging through old forums with limited information, digging through code, and hundreds of trials and error. Ultimately, I found an open source project called Packet Protector. This required routers that used USB ports and required booting up with a USB port. It focused almost entirely on security, but it was a reverse proxy, so it gave me a rough outline of something we might be able to do. There was no UI, and it certainly was not a commercial-ready product. Over months, I built over and over again on Packet Protector. I spammed the creator so much, the creator of Packet Protector and anyone who would respond in the OpenWRT forums. And I started learning OpenWRT to where I could start to write pieces and modify the firmware. I didn't use any of the Packet Protector code, but it allowed me to flash OpenWRT and learn the code and learn how it worked. I can then take little bits and pieces of it and tweak it. Oh, that's what that did, and learn from it, and then go right back into the code. So there's one of the first lessons of hacking that I can give you. If you need a skill, learn it. Nothing beats in the end of acquiring the skill.